Hi, I'm Daniel Zwerdling.
Hi, I'm David Shipler.
Two reporters. Start now. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Danny. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Except, you know what I just read? As we record this, it's early August, there have been almost 400 mass shootings.
400?
In America so far this year.
400?
I know. Those numbers come from the Gun Violence Archives, the nonpartisan group. They say a mass shooting means at least 4 people got injured or killed, not including the shooter.
And I still can't stop thinking about the 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois. That killer was 21 years old. Police say he massacred 7 people from a rooftop and injured almost 50.
Officials say that the suspect voluntarily confessed to firing into the crowd. He spent 83 rounds, Savannah, into that crowd of people. He was dressed in women's clothing. He admitted to concealing
And those
himself
numbers are horrific, yes, but every mass shooting, of course, has terrible ripple effects far beyond those numbers. I mean, mass shootings really are a kind of domestic terrorism, don't you think? I mean, they terrorize entire communities and the whole country.
They do exactly what terrorists try to do, which is to take what is a relatively small episode and create a terrible fear that spreads quite widely. Today, we're going to do something a bit unusual, I think, in the discussion of this, because we're talking with 2 specialists who are actually doing something to prevent mass shootings. Monique Boudreaux runs the Behavioral Crisis Management Program at Nichols State University in Louisiana. She's a psychology professor and a certified threat manager. Monique, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And Matt Talbot runs a program to spot potential threats in the Veterans Affairs healthcare system in Southern Texas. He's a clinical social worker.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, I never knew that people like Matt and Monique existed until we started researching this episode. They both specialize in what's called behavioral threat assessment. They consult with private businesses in addition to their own organizations, and they help lead regional chapters of a national organization called ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. Well, it turns out that government agencies and schools and private companies have had programs for decades to try to prevent mass shootings, which I never knew.
You hardly hear about these programs in the media, but organizations have teams of social workers or psychologists and human resource specialists, maybe doctors, lawyers sometimes, law enforcement people. It depends on the organization. They set up systems to encourage students or employees to report any behavior that they think seems threatening or worrisome in some way.
And then the teams try to figure out, is this behavior actually harmless? Or do we need to worry that somebody might be about to hurt or kill people? And if so, how should we intervene? As Matt and Monique are about to tell us, pretty much every institution and community could have programs like theirs, but most places do not.
Matt, you've written, and I think quite perceptively, about the discussion that explodes after every single shooting, in which we kind of torment ourselves by saying, well, we should be controlling guns, we should be treating mental illness, we should be hardening security at various places, such as schools, and all of those things would help. But there's a fourth element that's not discussed as much, and that's the one that you're working with. And that's what we want to talk about today. I mean, how do you do threat assessments?
So, Monique, why don't we start with you? Your university, Nichols, is a state school, right? Just about an hour from New Orleans.
Yes.
Tell us about the system that you and your colleagues have devised. You somehow spot students and staff who might be in trouble, as I understand it, and you figure out, is this person going to grab a gun and murder people? Well, I'm being a little blunt. And what should we do about it? How does this system work?
So we had a situation where there was an individual who was probably struggling, just in general academically. And then they were working on some sort of assignment and had worked, I guess, a fair amount of time on it, was about to submit it. and whatever app or whatever program they were using had gone out. They thought it had to do something with the Nichols IT issues. Anyway, so this individual chose to send their professor an email, basically using phrases like, there's going to be bloodshed if my assignment is lost forever and I have to do this over again. I'm going to go down to the IT department and blah, blah, blah. I mean,
What was the blah, blah, blah?
I'm trying to remember. No, I'm trying to remember. I'd have to pull it up.
But making threats, in other words.
Absolutely. It doesn't even matter what the blah, blah, blah is. As soon as I see those things, I'm already alarmed. This was, I felt, a very, sort of direct threat. And the student sent the email to the professor. The professor then sends it, forward.
And then what did your behavioral threat assessment team do?
Who's on the team? I mean, what range of professional skills is represented on the team?
We have, our residential living director, who literally is the life and blood of a huge part of our population. We have a social worker. We have the director of our counseling and health services. So there's a number of us who will get together. But when it comes to a sort of emergent, imminent sort of issue, it's the police department and I who work it, and then I will contact others who need to be involved as the situation sort of shows itself. So the student sent the email to the professor. The professor then sends it forward. I get a call from the police department. I drive over there. She was very, very unstable. I sat her down. As a group, we all sat her down and we talked to her. I read out loud the email that they sent, and I said, look, do you not understand how this comes off? Oh, well, I was just kidding.
Yeah, which is often the case, isn't it? I mean, I think that it's been said threats are part of conversation, so to speak. They're kind of woven into the fabric of, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to knock your head off. So, the question is, how do you figure out whether that's real or not? And in this case, so how did you figure this out?
Well, a lot of questions in the interview. She went to go have a check at the hospital, and oftentimes that's what will happen. The goal is to try to get mental health help or find out what happened and then bring them back, and so that they can finish their college degree. Frankly, there was a decision that had to be made as to whether this individual is going to stay or not, but this individual seemed to have a good social network, I think a support system, and so we allowed her to have a grace period. There didn't seem to be any planning behaviors. There was no actual real evidence of any kind of action.
So there was no evidence that she'd actually researched or planned how she'd killed her professor or the IT staff.
It was this one instance. Several times I've been called in on these sorts of situations where, I could kill this teacher. Well, no longer are we in an environment where you can just say that. It has to be investigated. It has to be looked at. But you have to, again, look at that totality of what's going on, because these are individuals who are young. They don't understand their own coping mechanisms and skills oftentimes, and they're stressed out, and they have all of these things that are coming at them. You have these individuals who, are coming forward in class and who may appear on the surface to look like someone who may be a threat or may be high risk or whatnot, based on the media's coverage of all of these things. But when you delve into it, are not. We tend to see at the university a lot of folks who are frightened and forlorn. They're feeling lonely and depressed. And so you can't necessarily jump to any sort of conclusions, but also keeping in mind that there are very serious possibilities that could happen also.
Meaning a troubled student might get a gun and mow people down.
And so you have to be very thorough, and you have to just stay with the facts and stay with the data as much as you can.
Monique, what happened to that student?
We kept her in school. She's still in school. She seems to be doing well. And that's the goal. She had to stay and maintain a schedule to have regular counseling. There was a management system that included her checking in and also going to tutoring, because she was having some academic problems at the same time. If you can do that with the least invasive and least punitive kinds of measures at first anyway, until you can figure out what the heck is happening, to me, the idea that immediately if somebody says something like that, there's going to be bloodshed. Oh, well, we have to kick them out of school and ban them from campus. I just think that that's a terrible idea.
Well, yeah, the FBI even says better not do that. The person could come back with a gun.
Yeah.
Which has happened in some of the mass shootings.
So it's certainly not a solution. It might be an exacerbating step.
Treating any individual with respect, compassion, and dignity shouldn't that just be the way that we are as humans in general?
And that approach fits into a basic concept, which has a lot of intellectual integrity, you could say, a very well thought out system of trying to analyze behavior to assess threats. The seminal study was done more than 20 years ago by the FBI. They focused on schools, but their method, of course, could be used in many different settings. They warn against profiling. There's no simple profile that suggests who's going to commit mass murder in a school. Instead, they said you have to analyze 4 main areas of a person's life. And it's worth taking a minute to look at their analysis. This is a really brief, kind of concise and succinct description of it, because it goes on for many pages. I think everyone who runs a company or a school ought to have this in the desk drawer, because it's a very useful thing. So the 4 areas that you can look at are, one is a person's personality, and that is a matter of low tolerance for frustration and failure, difficulty coping with conflicts or insults, poor resilience, and that kind of thing. A second is the family situation, especially when you're talking about students in schools. How parents react to a student's threat is regarded by the FBI as quite revealing. And sometimes the lines of authority in a household are reversed, where the parents are actually afraid of their child, and the child seems to have his or her way with no limits and that sort of thing. So that's another area. And then a third is the school's culture, or in the case of a worker, a place of employment's culture. Does that person feel marginalized, out of the mainstream, feel bullied? A lot of the folks, have experienced bullying. And then finally, social dynamics. What kinds of friendships are there? What access does the person have to weapons and that sort of thing?
Well, one of the things about that report that really struck me was that there is no simple profile that can tell you who's going to commit a mass murder or not. And Matt, that report came out in 1999. Still valid?
Yeah, I think the biggest head turner, head shaker is that when we look back at the research, whether it's the school shooter publication in 99 or the exceptional case study or the Safe School Initiative, and these are landmark publications about this work, what we find from then all the way to present day is that the things that we can look for or should look for, the red flags, the see something, say something model, they've been consistent for more than 30 years.
Consistent?
Really? Yeah.
And let me summarize some other things that these studies have found. The Secret Service reported, and I didn't realize that the Secret Service has done some of the best research on mass shootings around the country. I guess it's not shocking when you realize they have to figure out people who threaten the president, is it real or not? In any case, the Secret Service found that 45% of the mass shooters in schools were motivated largely by personal grievances.
Some students have been bullied. A lot of students have been bullied, actually. And there's not much political content, it turns out. It's not that people are necessarily motivated, most of them, by political attitudes or ideas.
Right. Another Secret Service study found that only 3% of mass shooters, 3%, were motivated by political beliefs.
You could break it down whatever way you want. There's no profile. A lot of people, if you ask them a show of hands in a training, will say, I think the next person to do this is probably your single white male. Right? That's the popular response. But if you look for that person only, the single white male or just the white male, you're going to miss 52% of the other people that carry out these attacks.
Who are the other 52%?
It's a diverse group.
Not white males.
It's not all males. No, there are some females, but it's a largely predominantly male perpetrated type of behavior, but you have people who are Black or African American. You have people who are of Hispanic descent, though that's ethnicity, not race. You have people who are Asian American or of Asian descent. We saw that at Virginia Tech, or other people who are in fact of some Middle Eastern connected culture, as we saw out in San Bernardino, or we saw at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando.
Terror attack unfolded. Gunman Omar Mateen pledging allegiance to ISIS, walking into the Pulse armed with an assault rifle, killing 49 people. The video released at
Matt,
trial.
what's a recent incident where you had to go into action with a threat assessment, and how did you hear about the threat?
If you're somebody like myself who runs 2 threat assessment teams, I'm the only full-time person doing it with a lot of volunteer team members from a multidisciplinary lens. And last year we had 900 reports that came to our attention.
900 threats just at the VA in San Antonio?
Well, this year we're looking at 1,200, so last year is nothing compared to this year.
Oh my gosh.
So the way that we get informed about individuals of concern is we have a universally accessible reporting system where people can submit whether it's a direct threat, a veiled threat, or just behavior that seems a little bit off. For example, this coworker of mine is normally very social, outgoing, and lately they've been coming in and just being more isolative, reclusive. Their work productivity is different. Well, does that mean that person's on the pathway to becoming a targeted attacker? No, not necessarily. It could mean that they are a victim or an experiencer of intimate partner violence in the home, which is affecting their mood and how they show up at work. There could be workplace incivility or bullying that makes them more apprehensive to engage with other people.
So you say to employees of the VA, everybody, there's the secure part of our website. You can go and anonymously report concerns.
Yeah, if you see something concerning, and we list what those things might be, so it's not a guessing game, then here's who you can email to let us know.
So just to remind our listeners, we're talking with Monique Boudreaux, a psychology professor in Louisiana who runs a behavioral crisis management program, and Matt Talbot, a licensed clinical social worker who runs a program to spot potential threats in the VA's healthcare system in southern Texas. So how do you make those assessments, Matt? How do you take all those cases and look at each one of them and come to a conclusion?
Sure. So we look at every single one of them foremost. We never ignore anything. We have no tolerance for ignoring concerning behavior that's brought to our attention by our staff or visitors, patients, or whomever. And what we're going to do is look for the presence of risk enhancers that we know are frequently found in the histories of those people who have perpetrated targeted attacks. We could look at the case from 2 days ago in Highland Park. We could look at others from 99 back to Columbine as sort of a watershed modern day moment.
They cornered students in the cafeteria and the library where there was nowhere to run, executing their classmates who begged for their lives.
They were shooting anyone of color wearing a white hat or played a sport.
Screaming after they'd shoot up something, they'd go, woo!
When I'm assessing an individual, as we do on average at least 5 a day, what I'm looking for is, have there been any significant stressors in their life, significant changes, losses? And loss does not just have to mean somebody passed away. Loss of dignity, loss of integrity. I was embarrassed at work and I lost my reputation. Any type of loss. And we have to also remember that the loss, or what reality is not necessarily what you or I might think. It's the reality from the perception of that person.
Wow, interesting.
We had learned, and this is the see something, say something model comes into play. We have an individual who posts a very bizarre, disorganized YouTube video talking about their grievance. As you mentioned, Dave, there's a grievance historically. They had a deluded belief that they were afflicted with a medical condition that was not real, but they were fixed in their conviction that they had it and that the organization was not doing anything to help them. That spirals into, it's not fair, I'm aggrieved, I'm going to become a warrior, and I'm identifying as this person to fulfill my cause.
Now, the FBI has warned for decades about the importance of what they call leakage, right? You just mentioned that the man you started investigating had posted a YouTube video. That's leakage, I suppose.
Yeah, and leakage is somebody who is considering or thinking about or planning for some sort of targeted attack of violence They leak clues. They leak their ideas that are in their head or what they're thinking about to somebody other than the individual or individuals that they're targeting. And nowadays, social media is a huge outlet and platform for us to look for those elements of leakage, because that's where people are most likely to communicate, and do so because they feel like there's this veil of safety behind the computer screen. Fortunately, this person continued to use social media as that form of leakage to share what they were thinking and what their behaviors were, to the point that they started talking about the improvised explosive device that they were manufacturing at home. Now, do we know that that's real? Could it be an intimidation? I'm going to try to impress you. We could assume that because most people who threaten don't actually carry anything out. There's nothing credible there. That wasn't the case here. This person was crafty enough, skilled enough, and was actually taking those steps.
How did you know? How did you find that out?
Because of the YouTube video. Publicly made it available. The power of leakage cannot be underestimated.
But who reported the YouTube video? Who called you up or sent that email?
A good Samaritan in an international location, out of country, which shows the power of connection and communication and seeing something and stepping up, called local law enforcement, communicated with us. We determined at that point that, well, there's nothing imminent, nothing criminal, but let's watch. I'll tell you, it's funny. I had someone in a higher position than me, and I said, well, we're going to keep close tabs on their social media, their YouTube. And I was told, well, we don't really do that in this organization. And two, well, that seems impractical to use your time. And I said, I don't think it's as impractical as it would be to do recovery for all the fatalities if we did not monitor YouTube, which was the key method of discovery for this person.
Yeah.
And they backed off a little bit. He continues to post, which is great. And if we weren't monitoring that, we wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
We're watching. Local law enforcement's watching. The FBI shows up at his house to arrest him because at that point he had turned his veiled threats, or I might, into I'm going to, naming people he was going to target. He gets arrested. That's a crime for a terroristic threat, and he goes to federal prison.
How long was this guy in jail?
2.5 to 3 years. Well, we have a policy in our organization that under no circumstances we will never ban somebody from getting their care. I love it because it forces us to think like a threat assessor and find other solution than let's kick him out the door. Let's ban him. We don't have to see him again. That doesn't solve our problem, especially on a campus with we have like 23 open exits and entrances that aren't secure. So anybody could walk in at any time. Once he was released, we brought him in with his wife, who he trusts, because then she could be a support for us. If his behavior changes at home, she can let us know. Then as a good faith, to really build trust with him and connection, I looked at the legal stipulations for his release. There were 5 points that the judge ordered. I did not agree with 2 of them, and they agreed to remove 2 of the stipulations. So an example, you need to do substance use treatment for somebody who's never had a substance use problem. That doesn't make any sense. Decreasing those requirements also decreases the stress for somebody who doesn't drive, lives in a rural area, and would have to attend more appointments and more commitments than they otherwise can. The goal here was we want him to feel welcome. We want him to feel connected. So we opened, regular phone communication with him at least once or twice a week. We want him to know that we are there to help him. The fear about him has trickled off, and we can prove to him, look what happened. When you did the right thing, look how everybody embraces you now.
That's a great story, Matt. Is he okay now?
He's awesome. He's funny. He's retired. He has a stable income, very involved with his children's lives. So, we're thrilled, and we've shown him there is more purpose and meaning.
I can imagine some listeners thinking, gee, it's great. Stopping mass shootings, of course, is something that we all want, but what are they doing looking at my social media and analyzing it anyway? I mean, do you get any pushback at all from people who think, hey, hold on, you're going too far?
Well, privacy comes up a lot, especially in the university system. But the question I think you need to ask yourself is, if you see things that are making the hairs on the back of your neck stand out or are concerning you, and then you don't say something to somebody and something happens, are you going to be able to live with yourself? What's the worst case scenario you're willing to accept?
One of the things that has struck me about what both of you have said, Matt and Monique, is that when these sorts of potential threats come to your attention, the first instinct is not to somehow be a law enforcement officer and, send this person to jail or kick them off the campus at Nichols State University. your first instinct is what's going on with this person and how can we intervene to help her or him? Right, Monique?
Absolutely. And the behaviors are red flags. And, when you're on a university campus, when they're students, it gives you a little more leeway to be able to require them to come talk to you or connect with them in other ways, shapes, or forms. And correlated very much with targeted violence is also suicidality. And we see and have seen an increase in suicides in all age groups, but in particular, adolescent age range.
So statistically, to your point, I mean, we know that leading up to mass violence, about 30% or so are having at least, waxing and waning thoughts of suicide prior to the event, about 40% or so during the commission of the event, and almost 60% experiencing suicidality thereafter.
And so in the last few years, I've had to do a number of suicide evaluations on students just to make sure, okay, what's going on? Are you okay? And Matt's point about, the connectedness. One of the statements about suicidality is that you want to make sure that they have an adult that they're connected to, but they have to feel connected. We have all this social media stuff of followers and, people who are our quote friends. And it's such a, I don't even know how to verbalize it, but it's such a falsely created sense of friendship, and it's constructed in a way and such that if that is what is defining you, it's going to make you feel so empty. And so I think a lot of these students and or just individuals, when they feel they have 2,000 friends on whatever it is or followers, but yet they feel so alone, and they spend a lot of their time living in a two-dimensional world. It's very hard when they don't feel a connectedness with somebody. And I know that in times when I've had to call a student in and talk to them, when someone has reported them and they're like, well, why am I here? I said, well, you're here because people care about you and love you. And then we opened up a dialogue about what's going on with them. And oftentimes they will tell me, I can't believe someone cared enough to call.
It's unfortunate. We tend to have a different perspective on something where we need to have the same approach. And what I mean by that is when you have somebody who approaches you and says that they're having thoughts of hurting themselves or committing suicide, we go into a very compassionate helping role, no matter who we are, professionals and bystanders alike. We got to get you help. Are you okay? No, you have so much to live for. We want to encourage them to be a better version. Whereas when somebody says, I'm having thoughts of hurting somebody else or killing somebody else, you have a student who says, I want to kill my teacher. If you take an approach of leading with the head, then you're going to go through the traditional rigmarole of, do you have a plan? Do you have intent? Do you have access to weapons? Let me figure out what my responsibility here is to protect or warn somebody and get you put in the hospital, right? Whereas if we lead with the heart, you're embracing that this person who said, I'm thinking about killing somebody else, they are crying for help. They're letting you know, because somebody who truly wants to do anything and they don't want to get caught is going to be as discreet as possible. And that's how we differentiate the true threats from the make-a threats. And sometimes, how do you know if it's just somebody who's making a threat? Ask them. What that person needs you to know, what any human being needs you to know at a point of crisis, always trumps what you want to know. And too many professionals get locked into their traditional MO of, I've got to ask these questions and assess for this. And they forget that at the end of the day, this is a person struggling to feel connected to something of value. So help them figure it out.
It's curious, and it's too bad that the public doesn't hear much about people like you two. You get reports every day about people who might pose a threat, who maybe could become a mass shooter. You do behavioral threat assessments. You decide what action to take. That's great. But I can imagine our listeners saying, but what can I do to spot potential threats? What can my coworkers or fellow students do?
People hearing this are thinking, I don't know if we can put in place a big reporting system like the VA has. So maybe just tick off some common sense things that every institution, a small business, a school, a corporation, what could listeners do to start implementing this sort of approach that you guys take?
I work at a public institution with financial challenges. And so you have to make a little go a long way. It doesn't take a whole lot to create a threat assessment team. You have to have caring people who are willing to work together, want to work together, a multidisciplinary team.
And the multidisciplinary team should include, obviously, a social worker and or psychologist or psychiatrist, I suppose, perhaps, mental health specialist, law enforcement, I guess you would say.
Again, a multidisciplinary group from the appropriate, depending on which organization you're looking at. And, you sort of create a central person who then coordinates all of the activities. You have, education. You have to educate the members of whatever agency it is, or the business or the school, and continue over and over and over again, having trainings and education.
And I think common sense is the most paramount piece of the puzzle, more so than any of the research, because Monique can do her part with facilitating her teams. Likewise, I can do the same. But in order to really identify these individuals where they might need help, and there's an opportunity to help and to do the intervention, the most important players are everybody other than the professionals doing this work. This is a collective community effort. We need people out there who know what to see, what to say, and more importantly, they need to know what to do about it when it happens. I think that the things that you can look for most prominently are significant changes in behavior, part A, and part B is that cause you to be concerned or worried. If you focus on that, that's the best starting point. Everybody's got email. I don't care how big or small your company is. So you know what? You just encourage people, if you're concerned about something, tell your favorite teacher, tell your football coach, write a letter, have an anonymous Dropbox. You can find ways to do this because, well, we had to find ways before when we didn't have the internet. So there are still ways that we can do these things.
I can imagine people thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to train ourselves? Well, one thing that might be helpful, and maybe there are others like this, you can tell us, after the Sandy Hook horrific massacre, just 10 years ago, 2012 in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, at that elementary school there, how many children? I think more than 20.
20, I think.
Children and teachers were murdered. One of the mothers and others in the community put together a group called Sandy Hook
Promise.
Sandy Hook Promise. Thank you. And I was looking at their website the other day. They have materials that they send out for free, I believe. Is this right? To anybody around the country who wants them, that give you more tips like you're giving us now about what do you do? How do you put this together? What approach should you take?
Yeah, they're wonderful. And it's not just Sandy Hook Promise. No matter where you look, there is a plethora of information, whether it's through our Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, Safe and Sound Schools, people developing these reporting apps, the National Threat Assessment Center. If everybody out there were just assigned, every person in the country, to read like Making Prevention a Reality, which came out in 2019, I believe, from the FBI. And I wish we could assign that to every person in this country just to read it and have the common sense understanding of steps that we can take. If time permits or you're interested, there's a very personal story for me that connects to why I do this work in a way that says, I'm not just preaching this. I've practiced what I preach. And sometimes it's very uncomfortable.
Yes, please tell us that.
So back in 2015 or 16, a friend of mine or someone I knew on Facebook, all of a sudden, out of character, so we're looking at personality and we're looking for changes in behavior, starts using the social media site to post a lot of very intense, angry commentary. At first, it started at the time we were debating about what gender can use what bathroom and where and at what time. So this person became very opinionated about the political landscape, which was not uncommon for a lot of people to do on social media, but it was different for this particular person. In addition, not just that in isolation, this person started broadcasting. This is leakage. I'm sharing information. I'm sharing clues that you should be concerned about me. They started developing a new interest in weaponry and firearms. This was a new interest, out of character, posting pictures of the weapons, posting pictures of the targets that he's shooting at with the bullet holes. At the same time, then the rhetoric on the social media posts becomes more intensified, and they develop a hate-based speech towards the president at the time, who happened to be President Obama. So you have this hate speech coming out, these changes in behavior. What I knew about this person was they lived alone. They lived a very isolative and reclusive lifestyle. They had a history of being prone to becoming depressed. All of those things combined were relevant for that person at that time.
And this was a friend who alerted you to this. Is that right?
No, this was what I saw directly on social media. I'm observing all of these changes in behavior. And the reason I knew those were significant changes in behavior was this was my father.
Oh, my God.
Oh, wow.
And the reason that I think it's important is I had a choice in that moment. I could look at everything I'm looking at knowing, oh, this is the stuff I tell people when they see they should speak up and say something. But then I could also default to what we hear so often after these events is, I never could have imagined it would have been my father, my brother, my daughter, my uncle. Everyone who does this is somebody's father, sister, brother, uncle. So we have to get that ridiculous narrative out of our mouths because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if I had resorted to that, perhaps I would have ignored some pretty telltale signs that were concerning enough. I didn't. I reported it both to the social media site, but more importantly, what I think was the most significant step I could have taken that any of us could take about somebody we love or care about is I picked up the phone and had a conversation. My dad was a pretty isolative guy, as I mentioned. I didn't know that he was recently diagnosed with diabetes. I didn't know he'd been visiting an oncologist to rule out cancer. He lived alone. I didn't know he was living in a dilapidated style that was, after he passed, pretty soon after, was just what you'd see on a show of Hoarders with the infestation. You know, this was somebody who wanted to be private intentionally. But my goal in that moment of being concerned was, I'm not going to allow you to be private. I care about you. I'm a human to human. Forget that you're my dad. And all I said was, what's going on? Are you okay? Now, nothing ever happened. There was no mass shooting. And my dad would end up passing away from a medical issue about a year later. It's tough to say that I don't believe my dad had anything to live for. And if he had gone out and he had attacked a lot of people because his grievance was, the world has done me wrong, I will never know if my interventions made a difference. And the reason that's significant is in this work that we do, that Monique and I do, and all of our other colleagues who we admire and learn from, we can't quantify or qualify how many of these circumstances we've stopped. 900 incidents reported to us where I work last year, no sentinel events. Was it me? Am I a superhero? Highly doubtful. Was it my team, the multidisciplinary team of experts? Maybe. Was it just the picking up the phone? We don't know. I'll never know if I made a difference, but I'll never have to wonder if I could have made a difference.
Matt Talbot and Monique Boudreaux, you've taught me a lot. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about it.
Thank you very much for being here. I hope people will take this to heart and that your approach really filters into the society at large in a much more grassroots way than it has.
I think we hope so too. And we just want to thank you both for having us out. We really appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode of Two Reporters.
You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, or pretty much any leading podcast site. And we hope you'll check out more of our work at tworeporters.org or tworeporters.net. I'm David Schipper.
And I'm Daniel Zwerdling. Please join us again soon for another episode of Two Reporters. Bye-bye.